Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Army of Women Researcher webinar series. My name is Nikki Larita. I'm the Research Manager at the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation, and I'm excited to be hosting the session today. Before we get started, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Siobhan Phillips, for taking time to teach us about the work you've been doing. We also have Dr. Susan Love, our Chief Visionary Officer, as well as Leah Eshraghi, our Clinical Research Director, here today. For members who are unable to make it, we're going to provide a recording of today's webinar on the Army of Women website. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Phillips about her OPT-ACT study, which paved the way for the second part of the study, Fit2Thrive. Today's questions will be facilitated by Dr. Love. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our researcher. Dr. Siobhan Phillips is an assistant professor in the Department of Preventative Medicine at Northwestern University. Her research focuses on understanding the determinants and health outcomes of physical activity and the translation of this research to practice. She has extensive experience in designing and conducting randomized exercise interventions for cancer survivors. She has published over 70 articles in the areas of aging, cancer, physical activity, and implementation sciences. Her work is currently supported by a Career Development Award from the National Cancer Institute, the Lynn Sage Cancer Research Foundation, and the Robert H. Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center at Northwestern University. Dr. Phillips has collaborated with the Army of Women program since 2010 with 3 different studies: Quality of Life in Breast Cancer Survivors study, the Fit2Thrive study, and the study we'll be discussing today, titled The Optimization of Mobile Health Physical Activity Intervention for Breast Cancer Survivors. I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation and the GoToWebinar platform. First, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please send them to us through our questions tab, which is located at the side of your screen. We will have time at the end for questions, so we'll make every effort to answer as many questions as we can. Finally, a recording of today's webinar will be available shortly after our call. And with that, Dr. Phillips, you can start your presentation.
Great, thank you, Nikki, and thank you to the Army of Women. As you were saying that, I was realizing I've been involved with the Army of Women for almost a decade now. Doesn't seem, time flies when you're having fun. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we developed the Fit2Thrive study, and like Leah said, or like Nikki said, that study was called the OPT-ACT study, and we were trying to develop a technology-supported physical activity intervention for breast cancer survivors. So the first question is, why study breast cancer survivors? Well, advances in early detection in cancer treatment and the general aging of the population have resulted in a growing survivor population. About 90% of breast cancer survivors survive 5 years, and there's currently about 3.5 million survivors in the US, and this number is expected to increase to 4.5 million over the next decade. Unfortunately, cancer and its treatment, particularly adjuvant therapy, doesn't just target the cancer cells, but it also targets normal healthy tissues. And as a result, there's a lot of negative side effects that can be associated with treatment, including physical, functional, psychological, and emotional and cognitive effects. And these effects do not necessarily diminish post-treatment. And compared to non-cancer controls, survivors report poor health and quality of life. So they have a lot of special needs that are not necessarily always taken care of, and that don't just go away after treatment. So physical activity is one behavior or intervention that's shown significant promise for enhancing health among cancer survivors. In the general population, physical activity has been associated with increased physical and cognitive functioning, increased psychological well-being and quality of life, increased muscle mass and bone density, decreased chronic disease risk, so diabetes, cardiovascular disease, second cancers, first cancers, decreased risk of falls. And a lot of these benefits have also been observed in cancer survivors. And there's also additional benefits of physical activity that have been found for breast cancer survivors specifically. This includes reductions in the negative treatment-related side effects. So this includes improvements in fatigue, physical functioning, quality of life, psychological well-being, and emerging evidence suggests that physical activity may actually increase survival and reduce disease recurrence progression and mortality. So as a result of these data, there are public health and cancer-specific recommendations for cancer survivors that indicate breast cancer survivors should engage in 150 minutes per week of moderate and vigorous intensity physical activity. So this includes things like brisk walking, bike riding, jogging, and swimming, those types of activities. However, despite the guidelines and all the benefits of physical activity for cancer survivors, population-based estimates suggest that physical activity levels in cancer survivors may actually be similar or worse than the general population. So about 2/3 are estimated to not meet these recommendations for physical activity. When you look at what happens to physical activity during treatment for cancer, data suggests that physical activity levels decrease by up to 50% in the 12 months after diagnosis, and that they do rebound, but they never quite return to pre-diagnosis levels. And we don't really know why this is the case, but these are what the data show us. And in addition, when you look at survivors compared to controls that we matched, this was a study we did in 2015, where we matched survivors to controls from the general population on age, body mass index. We found that survivors engage in 1 more hour a day of sedentary activity, so sitting, laying down, and about 1 hour less per day of physical activity than healthy controls. And this was actually using accelerometers, so objective data on physical activity. And so to date, there's been about 50 to 100 physical activity interventions that have been conducted in cancer survivors. Unfortunately, most of these interventions go from the research lab to the bookshelf. This is because these interventions tend to be very resource intensive. A lot of them are on-site trials, which have the obstacles of actually getting to the center to exercise. They involve a lot of study staff, so they require a lot of resources. This, of course, is not unique to physical activity and breast cancer survivor research, as data from just research in general suggests that it takes 17 years to translate 14% of research to practice, which means that there's a large gap between the research we're doing and what's actually out in practice, suggesting that more needs to be done to get effective programs out to people who need them. In this case, getting our physical activity interventions out to survivors. So technology is a promising tool for physical activity research. So smartphones, wearables like Fitbits, Apple Watches, they're becoming increasingly popular. A lot of people own them. And they offer an opportunity for us to reach more survivors and to give us the potential to create interventions that are more scalable so that they can reach more people than other interventions that require more staff or on-site. However, we know very little about their effectiveness, the use of a technology, whether it's effective or not, for increasing physical activity in breast cancer survivors. And it's important to kind of understand before we just say, okay, we're just going to give everybody Fitbits. It's important to understand, whether breast cancer survivors actually would even want to use Fitbits, how they would want to use them, and what other types of technology they'd be interested in using to help them increase their physical activity. And so there's a host of potential features you could put into a technology-supported physical activity intervention. This is probably not an exhaustive list, but it's a lot of the things we had thought about as we were starting to design the Fit2Thrive study and engaging participants in the OPT-ACT study. So there's basic educational information, which can be presented in a variety of ways through contact with study staff, through an app on a smartphone, through a website, through printouts. There's also coaches, which have been used in a lot of other interventions to try to increase physical activity. And this is where someone from the study team or from some other organization who's part of the study actually reaches out and calls the participants or breast cancer survivors on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, some type of regular basis. Other things we thought about were some type of team where women could connect with each other through, in this case, through technology, so things like some type of message board or online group webinars. And then there's the idea of having some type of buddy, so someone to provide social support. And we thought about this as being either, someone we could match a participant up with, that's, 2 people in the study, or it could be someone in the study and then someone in their personal life, and helping them support each other, possibly, giving them some of the resources from the intervention so that they're both able to use them. And then, of course, there's always incentives. So these can be things like monetary incentives, so paying people to exercise, or rewarding people through things like T-shirts, water bottles, other types of non-monetary but still incentives if they reach certain targets. And then, of course, the Fitbit is a technology tool that could be integrated that has been, that provides people with a way to monitor their behavior, see what they're doing, and see where they need to work on it. And then, of course, an app, which is, we knew from the beginning we were going to be designing an app, but it was thinking about what type of features of the app would be useful to people. So there's things like the ability to schedule activity, getting feedback on your progress, tracking activity, so like actually being able to enter activity, having activity challenges. If anyone's used a Fitbit, a lot of times you can enroll in challenges with other friends in the app and kind of compete with each other to get the most steps for the week, or maybe not necessarily, people might not be interested in competitive challenges, but having challenges where it's kind of an individual challenge where you're trying to challenge yourself to meet some specific target, like 5,000 steps a day for 5 weeks, or, doing some type of daily sit-up challenge, something along those lines. Then we'd also thought about a news feed where, similar to like what Facebook has, where the study team or participants could post relevant information. And then, as I mentioned when I was talking about the team, we also thought about having some type of message boards to connect participants and study staff or other resources. And then, of course, there's also text messages or app notifications, which could provide reminders, motivational messages, or other types of information to participants. And then exercise videos, so these can be online there's a lot of online platforms that have videos you can do in the comfort of your home, also actually old school DVDs. So these were kind of this was what, when we were thinking about, okay, well, what could we possibly put into this intervention? We basically made a long list and said, okay, there's all these options out there, but which ones are the best and which ones would breast cancer survivors be most interested in? Because the big question is, if we build it, will they come? And then, of course, will it work? So I received a Career Development Award from NCI to ask these questions in a 2-phase study. The goal of phase 1, which was really this OPT-ACT phase that I'm talking about today, is to better understand survivors' interests and preferences for remotely delivered technology-supported physical activity interventions, features, and to actually help us develop the intervention that we will then be testing as part of phase 2 to determine, what features are the most effective for increasing physical activity. And then we're also looking at quality of life. And so we're trying to make the gap between research and practice smaller by considering real-world implementation from the start. And so we're doing this by engaging survivors in the design. We're using technology survivors already own. So to participate, you do have to have a smartphone. We aren't requiring any on-site visits, so no one ever has to come see us. And we're recruiting nationally for both phases. So we are engaging women and enrolling women in the study completely remotely. We actually never see anybody face-to-face, which is it's a unique way to run a study. And of course, we're using the Army Women to recruit for both phases and building off the study we did in 2010 that looked at determinants and outcomes of physical activity in breast cancer survivors. And we've finished phase 1 and are currently working on papers from that part of the study and are recruiting and collecting data as part of phase 2. So as I mentioned, I'll just be talking mostly about phase 1. I'll give you a little sneak peek into phase 2 at the end. So this is an overview of the flow through phase 1 of the study. Like I said, this whole process was done online or through the phone, so everything was remote. We recruited women, we screened them, we had them sign informed consent, And then everyone that consented was sent a link to an online survey, and we randomly selected a subset for a phone interview so we could get, kind of this large scale survey data from people, but then also get in depth with a subset of survivors to see what what this survey data might mean. And then we synthesized both the survey and the interview data and had a consensus call with a subsample of participants. So everyone who had done an interview was invited to participate in these 2 consensus calls. And then once we were done with that, we got feedback. We actually started to design the app and the intervention. And as we were doing that, or when we were, getting close to having a prototype, we actually had a subsample of women we randomly selected to participate in field tests. So they actually used the app and tested it out, or specific features of the app. And then we sent everybody a post-engagement process survey just to see, how this remote process worked, what people thought about it, just to give us some information so we can think about what we might do next. So as I said, we're recruiting obviously from the Army of Women. We recruited from the Army of Women to participate in our study. We tried to have the recruitment criteria be identical to those for the intervention phase to reflect the end user, with one exception. For the intervention, women have to be inactive, but for this phase of the study, we didn't actually restrict on activity levels. And that was because we wanted a mix of women who were active and weren't active, so that we could get a sense of what people who were successfully active thought might be helpful, and what people who were struggling or trying to become more active thought would be helpful. So it was women over the age of 18, diagnosed with stage 1 through 3 breast cancer. They had to be at least 3 months post-treatment, but within 5 years of diagnosis, had completed all adjuvant therapies, but they could be using endocrine therapies. They had to be able to speak and write in English, because all of study materials are in English. And then they had to own a smartphone and have access to a computer. Exclusionary criteria were if they had any major cardiovascular, respiratory, or joint problem that prevented them from engaging in physical activity, or they had metastatic disease. The Army of Women advertised for us, and basically overnight we had 219 women who were interested in participating, and they were sent a link to an online screening. And if they were eligible and interested, they were automatically redirected to the informed consent. And we had 104 women complete the informed consent, and we actually had to stop recruitment because we had saturated and reached our budgetary constraints. So we stopped at 104 women. This is what the sample looked like. We had 28 women that participated in the interview and 96 women that completed the survey. So there was a total of 96 women in the study. We had 38 states represented. On average, women were 56 years old. Over half were working full or part-time. The majority were white and non-Hispanic and had obtained at least a college degree. Most were had been diagnosed with stage 1 or 2 disease. And then all had received surgery, and about 2/3 had gotten radiation, chemo, and or endocrine or hormone therapy. Just under half rated their health as very good or excellent, and about 40% met the physical activity recommendations. So we had a good mix of people that were meeting recommendations and were not meeting recommendations. So for the online app design survey, we sent this to everybody, and we asked them what they thought, how they thought technology might be helpful in getting them to be more active, what intervention components or features they thought would be most effective or useful. So that list I sent you at the beginning, that I went over at the beginning, pretty much asked them about all of those features. Like, do you think a Fitbit would be helpful? Do you think some type of messaging would be helpful? Do you think scheduling your activity would be helpful? And then ask them about type of content they'd like the intervention to include. So we did ask about things like, if we were going to give you educational content, what's really important for us to include in that content, what other things do you want? And then we also asked about the app design. So actually thinking here more the color scheme, how feedback would be presented, if it's, a graph, a circle, a chart. And then preferences for a wearable physical activity tracker. So would you want to wear it, clip it to your clothes, wear it on your wrist? They even make them to wear around your neck, just so we had a sense of kind of what women were most interested in. And then we also asked about the intervention name, which is how we ended up going from OPT-ACT to Fit2Thrive. I'm terrible at acronyms, so it was really great to get some feedback and get a much better name for our study. So that's how we ended up with Fit2Thrive. And then for the interviews, we had 28 women complete the interviews. They lasted from 20 to 60 minutes. They did these over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, so we got all the interviews done in about 2 to 3 weeks. They were audio recorded on these interviews. We told them a little bit about the study, that we were trying to design a physical activity intervention to increase physical activity to meet the public health recommendations. And then we asked them questions about what they thought physical activity meant to them, perceived barriers and facilitators, how they thought technology might help them be more active, what intervention components and features they thought would be most effective and useful. And so once we collected all these data, we analyzed them. For the survey data, we just used basic descriptive analyses. And then for the interviews, we used an iterative approach to understand the underlying concepts. We had 2 research team members that actually read through the transcripts, identified relevant content, and then they developed codes to categorize that content, and then they assigned codes to all of the content in the transcripts, and then we all met as a team to kind of summarize these. We had people independently summarize these data, and then we met as a team to figure out, okay, what were the major themes here? And to do all these analyses from all these transcripts, we used a software called Nvivo. And so the survey data showed us that about the majority of participants were interested in some type of challenge feature, whether it be an individual challenge or where it was a more competitive challenge. They tended to prefer the individual challenges over the competitive challenges. Most thought a coach that would call them regularly or text them regularly would be helpful. Just over half thought a buddy would be helpful. 2/3 thought some type of team would be useful. And then the majority thought a scheduler and some type of news feed would also be useful features to have as part of the app. And then we also asked people about, what kind of content they'd want on the app. And so they thought some type of fit study where we demonstrated recent research with physical activity and cancer, having some type of study of the week would be useful. Just over half thought having a survivor spotlight where we highlighted somebody who had successfully been active after treatment would be useful. Most people thought little tips on how to get active, fit more exercise in would be useful. And then in general, people liked the idea of getting text messages or app notifications on their progress or to remind them to be active, just kind of giving them that little nudge. And then also just motivational messages to try to encourage them to do more exercise. And so when we looked at the qualitative data, we found 5 themes. The first theme was that survivors really wanted the intervention and its content to be relevant to them. They wanted it to be fairly specific to breast cancer survivors, but they also didn't want to open the app every single day and be reminded that they had cancer. So they wanted this balance between having it be really relevant, but also not being, reminding them every single day that they had cancer. They wanted it clearly linked to evidence-based information because a lot of them expressed that there was a lot of information out there, but it was almost too much information and they didn't really know what was relevant to them. So they wanted a place where they could just get this information very easily. They thought that they wanted the intervention to serve as a reminder to them that why being physical activity is so important. They also wanted us to think about a program that was flexible and that took into account common side effects of treatment and provided modifications and recommendations for exercises to address these side effects. And they were also interested in knowing what works for other similar survivors, so how they were able to fit exercise or physical activity into their day. They liked the idea of hearing success stories and the potential to connect with other survivors who were also trying to increase their physical activity. The second theme that really emerged was they wanted it to be easy to use. In general, they thought, technology is great, but they wanted it to be simple. They didn't want it to be complicated. They wanted it to be engaging, have it be easy to read, visually appealing. They didn't want something clunky. They didn't want something that constantly crashed. They wanted to be easily able to see their weekly physical activity goal, interpret their results, evaluate their progress, and see what they needed to improve upon. So they really just wanted something that was simple and easy to use. And then one of the other themes that emerged was they really wanted integration with wearables, so things like the Fitbit or an Apple Watch. They didn't want to have to carry their phone to track activity. They wanted the ability to easily track activity, so they didn't want to have to sit there and enter every single thing that they did. So they thought a wearable device would be useful, but they did also still want the option to enter activities because some of these wearables are not waterproof, so they don't capture activities that you do in the water, or they might not capture some other activities as well as they should. So they wanted to make sure they got credit for everything, so they wanted to still be able to enter activities. They also like the idea of getting reminders of what needs to be done. They wanted to easily view accomplishment, and they wanted these trackers to provide, they thought that they would provide positive reinforcement because they could see what they'd done one day, what they did the next day, and be able to easily compare, or what they'd done the week before. And then they wanted, in terms of the wearable, they wanted it to be easy to set up and communicate effectively and easily with the app. And like I said, they were really interested in making sure that they got credit for all the exercise, not only all the exercise that they did, but also activities of daily living. So like household chores, shopping. They wanted to make sure that all their activity was counting towards their goal. And then the fourth theme that emerged was the desire to have the app and the intervention content be positive, encouraging, and motivating. They wanted, to get credit, or in some sense, be rewarded or recognized for all the activity that they do. They wanted to feel a sense of accomplishment when they were active, and they liked the idea of, personalized messages that were encouraging, provided this reinforcement that they were, doing great things, and gave them reminders. And they wanted to be looked back at the progress they had made and be recognized for it. So they wanted to really feel like they were accomplishing something, and that it was encouraging them to do that and not feel bad if they weren't meeting all their goals. And then the fifth theme that emerged was that there was some variation in the level of structure and personalization that people wanted. Most women valued the ability to choose or change various features and frequency of feedback, so they wanted to be able to personalize the app. There was some variation in the type of level of structure they wanted. Some people wanted, preset goals, while others wanted more flexibility. The majority highlighted clear goals as pivotal to increasing physical activity. They wanted to make sure that they thought that having the program be adaptable to different abilities was important, and give them options to engage in different types of physical activity. They didn't want to have to only just walk or only just do a specific activity. And they thought that, making sure that gradual progression was highlighted was a key to success, so that people could see, start off slow and easy and see that they could accomplish it and then be excited to go forward. And then, again, many people thought that feedback and reminders would be motivational to staying active, but others thought that, these messages could get annoying, and so, or be discouraging. And so there was some variation there on whether they wanted to be able to have those or the ability to turn them off as well. And so once we had all these data, we had 2 consensus calls with women from the interviews. We sent them an executive summary, kind of showing them what we found from the surveys and the interviews. And then we met with them and stressed the need to balance, all the preferences and the information we'd gotten with creating an intervention that would appeal to most women, fit within our budgetary and time constraints, and then be feasible in terms of programming, so actually like development of the app, because some of these features are actually very complex to develop, and then kind of feeds back into the budget. And then we got consensus from them, an agreement that we were generally headed in the right direction. And what we settled on were this list of features as they were essentially the highest rated, and then of course most feasible features from all the information we had gotten. So for the Fit2Thrive intervention, features that were developed include getting the Fitbit integration with the Fit2Thrive app, a coach, online exercise videos, the Fitbit buddy, so for this, we did a buddy, but it's actually somebody and the survivors actually pick somebody from their personal life, and we send them a Fitbit so that they can engage with the Fitbits together. And then text messages, and then the app has educational content, a tracker, a newsfeed, challenges, and a schedule. So we were able to get, obviously this is not the full list of what people wanted, but we were able to get a lot of it in, or what we could get in, and what we thought was the most important based on the feedback we'd gotten. And then we took about 6 months to actually work on developing the app. And I should note that I had a baby like the day of, literally the day of the consensus call. So we were a little bit, the development process probably took a little longer even than it would in the real world. But we had 2 field tests.
It was the real world. I said it was the real world.
It was the real world. I was racing to get this all done. And then we had women actually use the app for a bit. They could provide feedback in real time. We had them complete surveys afterwards to tell us, what they thought about it. And then in between the 2 tests, we updated the app, added some additional features. And then we also had women help us review the motivational messages, and they rated them, told us what they liked, didn't like about them, so that we could revise them. And then we got feedback on what they thought about participating. Overall, most thought that we gave them information on what the intervention was. Most thought it would be helpful. About half thought they had significantly or very significantly contributed to the project, which is not surprising given the fact that some people might have been randomized to do all 3, and some people might have only answered a survey. Most people were satisfied with the time to participate, the study staff, the level of content, responsiveness, and their overall experience. And most said that they would recommend Fit2Thrive, the intervention, to friends, family, or other survivors. And so kind of the lessons we learned from this phase were that breast cancer survivors are interested and enthusiastic about technology-supported physical activity interventions, which is great. There might not be a one-size-fits-all intervention, so there was a lot of variation. And obviously, the goal of this study wasn't actually we had to decide on something, but it gives some insight that maybe we shouldn't be deciding on something, and we should think about how to customize things to the individual. It's possible to engage survivors remotely, but people might feel like they haven't contributed significantly to the project as a result of that. Also, the development process takes time, so I think the lack, the space in between actually doing the interviews and the consensus call and then actually getting a product that they could test was longer than most people anticipated. And so I think there can be difficulties with that, with people feeling still engaged during that process. And of course, we can't do it all. We would love to have developed, to be able to develop all of this and give everyone everything and give them the options to choose from. But it's the real world, and unfortunately, we do have constraints. And so we couldn't do it all, but maybe we can get some more of these features in future studies. And so we use this data to create the Fit2Thrive intervention, which launched in April 2017. We also plan to use these data to help us think about other interventions. So some of the features we couldn't include in this one, thinking about trying to test them in other interventions. And then, like I said, we're evaluating the effects of the intervention on physical activity and quality of life. And once we're done with that, we're going to sit down and look and think about revising the intervention as necessary, some of the features, and then think about using Fit2Thrive in more diverse groups, other cancer types, and of course, trying to get it into real world settings. So like I said, there's a sneak peek. We've had 278 women consent to date as part of the Fit2Thrive study. We were actually shooting for 256, so we're going to be slightly over, which is a good thing. That's not usually a problem we have in research. And we've had a few people drop out since they consented, but we've had 185 women actually start the intervention. And so this is just a snapshot of what those women look like. They look pretty similar to our sample from phase 1, which is a good thing in terms of we designed for our target audience. And then this is just some preliminary data that we've had 132 women actually complete the post-intervention acceptability survey. And so in general, 3/4 thought the app design was they were very satisfied or very satisfied. They thought the app content was good, technical support was good, and then they thought, you know, us as a staff, we were knowledgeable and professional, we had good level of contact, we were responsive, and overall have really felt that their experience in Fit2Thrive was, you know, they were satisfied or very satisfied with their overall experience. So this is good news to us, and we hope that continues with the rest of the women that are finishing the study. So ultimately, we're hoping Fit2Thrive is the first step in helping to make it, helping to get, you know, research out into the real world, and you know, not let our research end up on the bookshelf. And so hoping that, you know, if it is effective, we can try to get it out and reach more women to help them use these resources and get more active after treatment. So just to end on some acknowledgements, of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without all of the study participants who so generously give of their time to us. And, you know, the fact that they stay engaged in doing this when they actually never meet us is very impressive. And then all my collaborators at Northwestern, Penn State, University of Alberta, and then the funding agencies that are supporting this study, and of course, the Army of Women, because without them, we would definitely not be where we are in terms of recruitment and so far along with the actual intervention of part of the study. So we're really grateful to everybody that helps contribute to the study. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. As you said, we're now going to take some questions. As a reminder, you can submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. We'll wait a few minutes for any questions.
I want to, this is Susan Love, and I want to congratulate you, because I think one of the things that often doesn't happen is that the potential participants are part of designing the intervention in the study. And usually it's a bunch of researchers in a back room coming up with what they think would be a good idea, and then they can't figure out why nobody will do it. And by including people from the beginning and really in developing it, I think is a terrific model, and I want to congratulate you with that. I think that was really good.
Thank you.
I wonder why you excluded people with metastatic disease. Because although obviously some people with metastatic disease may not feel up to exercise, a lot of people with metastatic disease do, and it might well be advantageous to them. So I just wondered what your rationale was.
Yeah, and that's a question we've actually been asked several times, and it's something that I have struggled with a bit, because I agree with you that I do think that they could definitely benefit from physical activity. Our ultimate decision was based on the fact that this is all done remotely, and you know, there's a lot of national conversations about what type of physical activity should be done, where, when, for who, and you know, the general consensus is that the side effects may be different, and that, you know, they may need some additional level of monitoring from their physician that other women who are kind of post-treatment, earlier stage survivors may not need. And so we ultimately decided, based on that, that you know, this might not be a safe program for them, and since we don't know, to exclude them. But I think that this is definitely something I would like to expand on in the future, and think about how we might be able to either integrate some of the technology components, you know, with the care team to get people more active, or test, you know, whether this would actually be effective and safe for that population.
Well, I think that even the non-metastatic people may have a lot of other comorbid, other diseases or other problems, yes, that you can't control that. So I think that's sort of, you know, I don't know that that's a really legitimate argument, but I think that if you let people, if you trust them to decide whether they think they're capable of doing it, or maybe talk with their care team, then there's no reason to exclude them, and they might have even a bigger benefit than some of the others. So I think you should really think about that part.
No, I agree, and that's, I mean, in the study we did in 2010, we did not exclude based on any type of on disease stage, and so we did have women that had metastatic disease in that study. And I agree that it is a population that gets excluded very often, and so it's, I'm sure, extremely frustrating.
Did you exclude people from having other medical problems? I mean, did you actually get into, well, do you have heart disease, or do you have, lung breathing asthma or whatever, or did you just take everybody? I mean, did you really look into their medical histories?
So they had to do a screening for it's called the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire, which is a screening for potential cardiovascular problems as a result of physical activity. And if they failed that screening, they had to get physician consent to participate.
You mean if the criteria failed them, as opposed to they failed them?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so basically, like it's a more just for a safety perspective. So basically, if they had, high blood pressure, if they're on blood pressure medication or cholesterol medication, they did have to get physician consent because they were technically considered at higher risk for a cardiovascular event. And in that case, because we are asking them to increase their activity, which can, trigger cardiovascular events, then they did have to get physician consent.
So you could do the same thing with the metastatic population.
Yeah, definitely. If there was a good, we could use that tool, or even think about another tool that might be more specific, where if there's a specific, side effect or specific ailment that they're having that really is, suggests that they would need greater supervision, we could definitely do some type of screening to determine whether this would be an appropriate intervention for them or not. I'm just not sure if there's a really well-established, screening criteria for that, but I definitely think it's something that we.
You could have them give their physicians permission or something, get their physician's position.
Yeah,
that
we could essentially have that be a requirement. Yeah, we could definitely have that be a requirement to participate, to have their oncologist or primary care physician consent.
Yeah, because I think that otherwise it makes the study cleaner, but it actually doesn't help as many people. My other little point is that side effects are, and this is my own pet peeve, but side effects are, throwing up when you get chemo. It's really collateral damage that lasts for a long time. So a lot of the subsequent chemo brain or other problems that you get that last long after, I think are more collateral damage because they don't get better. It's sort of like having your car in a car crash. You can fix it, but it never drives quite the same way again. So I think calling them side effects is a little bit, I don't know, it's euphemistic on the physician, on the caretaker side, but it's not very accurate on the participant side.
Yeah, because it's really not a side effect. It's part of your life.
Forever after.
A persistent. Right.
Exactly.
I don't know. Is there a better term you would suggest using?
Well,
because I fully agree with that.
We use collateral damage, but I think you could, and most people know exactly what we're talking about. So that's one way.
So,
Nikki,
I like that. I like that term.
Yeah.
Actually, we have a new question that came in to piggyback on Dr. Love's question. Would you also explain the rationale for excluding men from the study?
Yeah, good idea. Good question.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great question. And, I think that as researchers, we look at the numbers, and most of the studies have been done in female breast cancer survivors. And I don't actually know of any studies in physical activity that have been conducted that have included male or specifically in male breast cancer survivors. And I think that, that's a really important population to look at as well. We excluded them because we were trying, I think that, women and men have potentially different preferences for these types of things, for these types of interventions. And so we were trying to keep it, our population rather focused so that we could be sure we were designing for our target audience and not not having it be where it wouldn't be relevant to them. But I agree that that was actually a great population as well to study where there isn't a lot of research, especially in this area.
Great. We also have a member who mentioned the Fitbit app looked great and was curious to know if you would consider an Apple Watch-based app.
Yes, I would definitely consider that. One of the major, I guess, barriers to that is cost. Quite honestly, I mean, if for us doing a study, because we typically provide all the Fitbits and all the monitors to participants. So right now they're just very expensive. But we could definitely develop something that would be compatible to any type of device. It just for our purposes, the level of programming that was involved, we weren't able to do that.
Okay. Looking through our questions again. Okay, great. So thank you again, Dr. Phillips, for teaching us about the OPT-ACT and Fit2Thrive studies. If you have any questions we didn't get to today or think of any new questions, feel free to contact us at connect@armyofwomen.org. We'll also post a recording of this webinar on the Army of Women website in a few days. So on behalf of the Army of Women, thank you so much for joining us today and have an excellent rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.